Surprise!
We're taking the EdUp Experience podcast to Insights EDU. Join us for an incredible higher education marketing and enrollment management conference, February 20th to 22nd in Phoenix, Arizona. Register now at insightsedu.com and use promo code EdUp to save $50 off your registration. Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education, is
Amazing!
thousands of copies have been sold across the United States and the world. You can pick up your copy today on Amazon. Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to EdUp on the EdUp Experience podcast, where we make education your business. Dr. Joe Salustio back as I always say I'm back again and again and again because it's true. We have set out now to interview the president of all 3,800 Title IV granting institutions in the U.S. We're at like 230 or 240. So we're well on our way. We're getting there. Lots going on in higher education right now. You guys, if you listen to this podcast, you know we're bringing you a lot of diverse perspectives as the conversation around workforce, relevancy of college degrees, skills stacking. You know, there's a lot going on in higher ed. And as I said, I already said that once, but I'm saying it again. So in order to clear this up for us and clear this up for you, we have brought somebody to the microphone today that not only knows all the answers, no pressure to him, of course, now to answer everything with complete accuracy, but he writes about these things on an almost daily basis. Ladies and gentlemen, to the microphone, you know him, you've heard him, you've read about him. He's Paul Fain. He is a higher education journalist. Paul, welcome to the EdUp Experience microphone. How are you?
Doing well, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here, man. First, as we talk about higher ed, which I know we're going to do, but we want to learn a little bit about you. You know, first of all, when you became a journalist and you thought, I'm going to start writing about something, did you just pick higher ed, or did it fall into your lap? How did you get here?
Yeah, 20 years ago, I was working at a weekly down in Charlottesville and applied for a job at the Chronicle of Higher Education. And as you may know, there's a big university there in Charlottesville. So I had already started to get some sense of the influence of higher ed on a local economy, politics, etc. It was a temporary gig. I was actually a temp. I wasn't even on the masthead at first, but eventually I got that college president beat, which you are on yourself these
Surprise!
days. Yeah. And I, just came to realize that it can be so much. It's much more of a broad societal impact beat than you might think. So I've stuck around and changed what I'm doing here and there, but still going 20 years later.
You know, that's a really good point you bring up. What's the spread of higher education? We tend to think, and I think a lot of people who listen to this podcast, we're always looking internally. You know, how the business model is broken. How do we keep curriculum relevant for workforce? But there's such an external part of higher ed, the communities, the people, whether we're educated or we're not, whether there are jobs available, what happens when there are no jobs available. There's so many parts of it. How do you decide what to cover? And let me ask a secondary question to that. Are you trying to show the inside out or the outside in? How do you think about your reporting?
Yeah, good question. So, for the last almost 3 years, I've done my own newsletter focused on connections between education and work.
And of course, you got to plug that newsletter.
It's called The Job.
The Job. And
yes.
You can go where to sign up for that newsletter, Paul?
I would go to, I've been asked that question before, and there's no easy answer, which is probably a problem. But you go to Workshift, which is a related digital publication on Open Campus's website. You can find it there. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I was an editor at Inside Higher Ed for a decade before that, and had been focused entirely on open access institutions. I have never really covered college admissions to the selective side of higher ed. I think that's where a lot of the action is. That's where you're seeing a lot of the challenges for folks. And it's always been there. Higher education has struggled to boost the economic mobility of low-income people. We know that more than we used to. But, to me, following that story was the motivation to do this. The pandemic kind of upturned the apple cart. And I felt like, I'm an old school journalist. I'm not a pundit. Where's the story? I'm a follow the money guy too. That means policy, that means investment, that means financial troubles, intentions. So I felt like the disruption to the labor market and its impact on higher education and people was where I should go with the beat for right now.
Nailed it.
It's funny because as you talk about your career, Chronicles, I think, very inward focused when it comes to higher ed for the most part, talking about institutions, the things that are going on at those institutions. Then Inside Higher Ed comes along many years later as they split off. And I know you did some work for them as well. And now you go to the workforce reporting, which everybody's trying to do. And it's very confusing, I find. I have a lot of folks on that talk about the connection of higher ed and workforce, or the disconnection maybe. It's a confusing space because skills, like what skills and how do you think about what skills to obtain? And if there isn't a degree higher ed, how do you communicate the value of those skills when there's so many offerings? Credential Engine is a organization. They say there's like 1.4 million credentials now or something like that. Isn't it confusing? Is it confusing to the journalist, or is it not confusing to the journalist, but you're educating the rest of us on how makes sense it is, but it's just confusing to us?
Oh, I think it's enormously confusing. I think I've always felt like higher ed challenges me intellectually to cover, because first of all, you can't generalize about anything in higher ed. You can do it, but you're usually wrong, or you're doing something simplistic. Like, it's just, there's so much. Which higher ed, which part of the country, for who? It's an enormous industry. But to me, like, one of the things that I'm trying to do with this newsletter, higher ed's challenges and people's challenges don't stop at higher ed. I love Inside Higher Ed, still friends with those guys.
Yep.
It's a publication that's focused on higher education for people primarily who work in higher education. But if you want to cover the workforce and the challenges to the workforces, I feel like it was important to step back and to have a lens that is about K-12, that's about post-secondary education in all of its forms. That means maybe not accredited sometimes. And it's about corporations. It's about the hiring side. And I must tell you, even with that lens where I can look big picture, it doesn't make things any less confusing. And I think it's kind of paradoxical in that I write a lot about higher ed's crisis, whether it's the enrollment crisis or the crisis around people's perceived value of higher education. But also I think right now we, meaning people who write about higher ed or policymakers, are starting to realize and accept this problem is bigger than higher ed. Like, you can be frustrated with college's inability to move people up in economic and social mobility, but that's not all on higher ed right now. So I think that's kind of the good news. Like, there's a little more sobriety about what really can college fix anyhow. Like, it's not easy, and it certainly can't do it all by itself.
When you say we can't do it by ourselves, is it the states? Is it the employer themselves? Is it the government? Who is it that also has some onus on fixing what's wrong?
Sure. I mean, I think you raise the skills issue, which is a good one, and another really complicated one, as you mentioned. Like, okay, so we know 14 or so states have dropped degree requirements in hiring. There's companies doing it. There's a focus on skills over credentials, at least in the rhetoric. All that said, what do people in HR typically do? They still look at the degree. They do what they know. They do what's worked for them, or what they're familiar with. A lot of people who are in positions of power at employers have, degrees themselves. And so, I think looking at where things go awry for the 50% of Black college students who will default on their loans, among those who borrow, there's a lot. And by the way, the overall number is over 30%. It's not just college. It's the employers who tend to hire privileged people for good jobs. It's, geographic concerns. I mean, being at a rural institution is hard right now for a lot of people. It's hard for people in rural communities, period. So I think, yeah, sure, states, government, I think we all agree that low income people could probably benefit from more help, whether it's wraparound services as they pursue a degree. So I think most people agree some role for government to help here, but absolutely employers. I think even people like me, like I think what is, for economic mobility to happen, that means somebody has to give something up at the top. We have we have a wealth and income inequality crisis in this country, and it touches a lot of things.
Let me step you back into that explanation and talk about the employer and the degree, right? And I brought this up with one of my last guests. She's the CEO, founder of Gleek, which is a workforce. They do a lot of AI and workforce packaging, skills packaging for. She's based in Dubai, but anyway, point being that we talked about the college degree. It's a risk management tool, right? For people who are familiar with it. They say, hey, I've got somebody with a degree and I've got somebody without a degree. You know what? This person who has a degree, however you justify it, it goes something like this. They completed something. They've shown some level of grit to complete it. And this person who doesn't have a degree, I don't know if I'm going to get the same feeling from them. So I'm just going to take the one with a degree because there's less risk on that person. I understand the structure of associate degree, and I take a step up to bachelor degree, and I take a step up to master degree, and so on. The skills conversation for somebody in HR, unless you're in tech, where there's a very clear, like if I get an AI, if I get some kind of certification in Google or with Amazon, and I'm going to go code, there's like this direct relevance of that skill. But in most jobs, there isn't direct relevance, which is why the space is so confusing, because you're relying on somebody who is trying to reduce risk to go and take more risk in a lack of understanding those skills. And I think that's one of the missing pieces for both employees and for universities is how do you connect those? How do you allow me as an HR manager to reduce risk while understanding that these credentials or certificates, which I don't know what the difference is between those two things, but that they have value,
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I hope that in most cases, the degree is about more than just the safer bet. But I do think, that it actually shows that people have durable skills, ideally, that go beyond concrete job specific skills. And I think that's mostly true for sure.
Yep.
Yeah. But to your point, we don't really have systems in this country. And there's a lot of work being done to try to change this, to connect people's skills to employment and training and education opportunities. The learner and employment record space is one I'm trying to report on a lot. Talk about complicated. That's a real tough one. Just even to understand what it is and what it overlaps with and why people should care. But yes, I do think there are efforts to try to help people display and show what they know and can do beyond just a transcript, which I think most people agree is a limited signal of quality in terms of its specificity. But yeah, we're still pretty much at square one in this country, despite all the work there.
Bullseye.
Talk to me about value. Income inequality, as you said, and wealth inequality in general is a big issue in our country, right? You got to give something up at the top to level out the bottom. The higher education degree itself is said to have less value or relevance to the workforce right now than it ever has, which is why you see a lot of students who are choosing not to go to college, and why many, 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 many people in higher education, my colleagues, will say, our college degree isn't as worthwhile as it used to be. We need to do something with it. And so there's a recognition internally that we have those issues as well. But the public says, you know what? I don't know if I should send my kid to college anymore. There's a narrative that hasn't existed before, and tilts much higher on the negative side. Are we responsible for that in higher education? Who's responsible for this value question, Paul?
Well, unfortunately, this is one of those ones where I'm going to have to push on the overarching assertion, right? Because which degree? I mean, I get the sense that everybody in the upper quintile of America is still sending their kids to college.
Yep.
I'd love to see some examples of rich people who've decided to opt out of college. And I don't really, frankly, care about the 3 or 4 outliers who get a job in tech at 19 because they're a whiz kid. But like people, there really isn't a crisis for selective higher ed. Let's be honest. The crisis is for community colleges, it's for regional public institutions, it's for rural privates. Why are people questioning that decision? If they are, there's data to suggest that you're right. There is some of that. Well, I think because, and there's polling also to back this up, is it a safe bet? I mean, I don't know. Like sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. People aren't stupid. Like I think if there's a dominant reason that people are more hesitant to invest their time and money in a degree, even though all data shows the degree remains the best ticket to the middle class and a good job. Absolutely. Like its value has potentially waned in certain limited indicators, but not really. Like on the whole, it's still great. It did great during the pandemic. I mean, you know, four-year degree holders are the ones who got to work from home and ride it out while essential workers went in. So, you know, it's actually getting worse. The gulf between the haves and have-nots, and four-year degree holders are generally in the haves. But if there is a hesitancy to invest in it, it's about the long-standing rhetoric about student debt, the student debt crisis, the student cost crisis. Like that's what's driving it, in my opinion. Probably not you know, a handful of employers saying they're dropping degree requirements. Right. I think, you know, and the other thing too is like people are stretched more than they used to be. If you look, you know, the pandemic really brought that to the fore. But if you're like a single parent at 28 with two jobs, like going full time to a four-year institution, like that's just not in the cards. It hasn't been for a while.
Attention.
Are you ready to elevate your institution's marketing and enrollment strategies? Join the EdUp Experience podcast at the Insights EDU conference, February 20th to 22nd in Phoenix, Arizona. Don't miss out on this opportunity to hear from engaging speakers from industry-leading companies like Google, LinkedIn, Adobe, and higher ed leaders. Learn the latest marketing and enrollment strategies to grow your programs. Register now at insightsedu.com and use promo code EdUp to save $50 off your registration.
Attention. Oh, yeah.
Join the movement to mobilize and revolutionize higher education by picking up your copy of Commencement, the Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education today. This book has been featured in Forbes, NPR, Harvard Business Review, CEO World Magazine, NBC News, CBS News, and Business Insider, among many others. Don't miss out on what today's highest college leaders have to say about the future of higher education. Pick up your copy on Amazon. You're right, and all that, and I love that because I've said on this podcast before as I ask about this value conversation, like who is the person that has said, you know what, I'm not going to send my kids to college, and what does that conversation sound like? And I really want that person to come on the podcast and tell me that they advise their kids not to go to school for whatever reason. I find that hard to believe. Where I think it's more common and where it hurts the most is the marketing around this. And I'm not saying it's formalized marketing, but the public perception of you don't need a degree or that rhetoric, it hits people that don't know how to decide on higher education. It gets them when they're most vulnerable and they start going, really? I shouldn't go to college? So instead of going to college and helping my wealth grow over years and years and years because I have an education, I choose something else and take a different path that may not be as fruitful for me for many years. It's hurting vulnerable populations, in my opinion. What do you think about that?
I certainly think that's a risk. Again, I have very skeptical that the degree value conversation is driving the enrollment crisis anywhere near the conversation.
You don't think they touch? You don't think it's having that much of an effect?
I think maybe some, but again, like the student debt conversation, are you kidding me? Like debt cancellation, yeah. Like I think we heard about that one. We're still hearing about like
this is lunacy.
The cost crisis, I think, is very much a bigger driver than, you know, degree requirements. Like, and you know, I will say, as you were talking, I'm like, yeah, who is the person who's ditching college for something else? Well, I mean, maybe people who are interested in skilled trades find the rare apprenticeship. Like that's a valid path. And you know, as we're seeing the demand for the services go up, like HVAC workers in California, that's a good field if you want to go into that. Now, again, like
busy forever.
That's not for everyone, takes a toll on your body, all that stuff too. So I think this is a very complicated stuff. But to push back, like I do think we have to be careful and certainly about a massive experiment to tell people who are already disadvantaged in this country to skip college. But on the flip side, like I talked to several big K-12 districts in blue cities in this country that are like, college for all was bad for our students. Like most of them weren't going to college anyhow, so they felt disempowered by that. Like we have to connect to careers and college being a path there. That seems like a reasonable, not risky way to approach this. And then just one other data point that, again, which degree? Like I'm not going to tell you right now to go to a regional public and take out debt to get a journalism degree. I'm going to tell you right now, that's a bad bet. There aren't many jobs. Unfortunately, the jobs go to highly selective college graduates. Like
that's
the Times,
fact. That's a fact.
It is a fact. The Times did a story a while back about a Apache school in Pennsylvania's journalism program. And I was kind of like, I would love to see the employment outcomes for those graduates. Sadly, my industry is in collapse. But, another one, CUNY, the City University of New York, is the best institution, one of them in the country at rising people in their economic mobility. Like they're doing all the right things. They have bulked up some of their computer science and other STEM offerings. A very sad study showed that 50% of people with CUNY science software engineering degrees aren't working in their field. And those that are have a median income of 45K.
Yikes.
Like, yeah, if you want to work in big tech in Manhattan, you still have to go to a highly selective institution. That's the problem. It's not the quality of the education CUNY's offering.
So brand still matters in higher ed, right? I mean, where you went to school, we always say it, where you went to school doesn't matter, but in certain jobs, especially really high paying ones, it still does matter a little bit. And that's unfortunate because CUNY, what they've done, they're securing great partnerships with big companies like JP Morgan Chase and otherwise to lift up those students. So they're doing great work. But yeah, you're right. There is still a backyard barbecue conversation of my kid went to so-and-so, or my kid's going to so-and-so, and the parent even who's going, I'm not going to mention where my kid's going because it's somehow lesser than. That's a cultural thing. That's been happening in backyards for forever and may continue to happen. Because like you said, who's the parent that says, you know what, I'm not sending my kid to college. Everybody, crack open a beer for me and let's celebrate. It doesn't work that same way, I don't think, in the eyes of the general parent and consumer, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of commonsensical, but there's really robust data to show the importance of social capital. Raj Chetty and co., their Opportunity Insights team, put out a massive study recently that showed that it's actually social capital is the thing more important than educational quality. And like I had a great analogy here, like a wealthy parent, how much do you spend helping your kid navigate the world? Okay, well, for people who don't come from wealthy, privileged backgrounds, think about the head start that person's getting in addition to the 6 figures of help that they get from their parents, so like, duh, of course it's going to be hard to break in. But yes, how do people get jobs? It's not typically what they know. It's who they know. And that's always been the way. And you go to college and there's all these intangibles. You learn how to dress the part, talk the part, you meet people, you hear about things. That's something that this country doesn't do very well for low-income people.
It is so true. We haven't never talked about that on the podcast, the who you know piece of it. Like, as you get older in whatever industry you're in, you have a coaching tree or you are part of somebody's coaching tree and they say, hey, I'm going over here. Why don't you come work with me? Nobody even looked at your degree. They didn't even barely look at your resume. That goes away after the first couple of jobs because people you're connected with get to know you in your industry. And then it just becomes a formality, not necessarily something you're being judged by. And it is who you know. It is. Everything is about connections and who you know. And it was even became clear during COVID when everybody started connecting because they couldn't do it in person. Those connections upped. LinkedIn mastermind groups and book clubs and all these things that created greater connections. That's such a good point. I want to come back to that. But I do want to just talk about your most recent newsletter, AI and Economic Mobility, that you put out. There's a sentence in here that I love. A rapidly expanding body of research explores how the adoption of generative AI may impact equity and economic mobility. This report you have has like 53 or something, 50 something links to get information out there of people who've written about this. Can you talk about how significant this issue of AI is on higher ed and really the workforce?
Yeah, it's a great question. I am not an early adopter person. I try not to be a cynic. I try to be a skeptic. And I've had my mind blown by people far smarter than me about the potential impact of AI on, on education and employment. I mean, you really don't have to go too deep to start seeing what this could be. Just like the essay writing as an exercise is forever changed already. Good teachers are using it across the board. That's only going to increase. It just started, right? So again, from an economic mobility standpoint, not to pick on, let's pick on Stanford. They're doing well. Stanford is going to help their students prepare for the AI world.
Yep.
All the super selective institutions are.
They got a
K-12
lot of money
districts
to set up
are.
a bunch of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm talking to a K-12 district soon that's talking about how to rewrite their curriculum. And the smart people in education are trying to get ready for this because it's going to be huge. It's a huge tool, no matter what. And it's here, period. And it's only going to get better. So the questions are the big questions for us. There are many. I mean, I'm getting to put a point on this. I think there's a tremendous hunger for help here. It feels like there's a dearth of usable expertise. I had again, someone who knows a lot more about this than me say it's somewhere between tech bros selling journalists on the robots are going to destroy the world and plagiarism and ChatGPT. There's a big gulf in the middle there
Skynet versus essay writing, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's just not enough. I think that's changing though. I do think that the wheels are really turning on everything from research to good reports to, think tanks trying to really help you, educators, best practices, what have you. But yeah, I think one of the big concerns is with most technology, the haves tend to benefit from it more than the have-nots. And that's already a concern in American education and training. So what does this mean for folks now?
Yeah, it's like when somebody says, you know what, you need to go write that job description. I go,
I don't think so.
I'm just going to put that into AI and it's going to give me what I need to save myself 15 minutes of thinking. And that's what it's all about. How do we enhance the work, not get replaced? Because you're going to need humans all the way along. Speaking of humans, we need Paul Fain to keep writing. Paul, what else do you want to say about your writing, your journalism, where we can find you, read about what you're writing? Give us a open mic moment.
Yeah. Just, I only am able to cover what smart people tell me is happening. That's how I work. I'm an incoming person. So, for folks who listen to this, please keep your tips coming and keep talking to me about what I should be writing about. But yeah, I think, I started this thing a couple years ago and was looking at it as kind of a pop-up publication. Feels like a big moment coming out of the pandemic, this kind of labor market disruption, as well as the insane higher ed enrollment crisis. Maybe the things would taper off and we'd start to get back to normal. That does not appear to be the case. The change is only accelerating, and that has a lot to do with AI. So I'm going to keep going and hopefully expand our publication work shift in the next couple of years.
And most importantly, tell us, crystal ball moment, what do you see for the future of higher education?
Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, I think one of the real questions for me is, have we hit the bottom in the enrollment collapse, particularly for the community college sector, where I think 45% of undergrads, where the real work of economic mobility has to happen. And I think, for me, I can't say what's going to happen, but the thing I'm watching most closely, I think, is the big changers in the two-year college space, the really creative, ahead of the curve community colleges' ability to bring in employers as partners to do responsive training programs to industry needs with state subsidies? Can they create stackable credential pathways that really work? Right now, there aren't many of those, but where somebody comes in, gets a free short-term credential in something like semiconductor for the semiconductor industry, and then can build on it to a 4-year degree. I think that's where a lot of the excitement is going to be, and where I think there's increasing interest in spending some money to support people with the social capital and, like childcare and transportation. I would say that those sort of models I would watch very closely, and apprenticeships and other types of experiential learning fit into that category as well.
Amazing.
Well, Paul, I have to tell you, it's been a real honor to hear from you, and I follow your work and read about it. I'm on your newsletter, so appreciate the work that you do. Keep it up. Did you enjoy your time here on the EdUp Experience?
Yeah, great questions, Joe. As a former podcaster myself, I'm impressed with what you've built here. The continuity that you've managed, it's really impressive.
Well, thank you, sir. Please feel free to come join me as a co-host anytime you'd like, if you want to dust off your old podcast mic, and I'm sure we'll find people that want to answer our questions. Ladies and gentlemen, he is a journalist extraordinaire for higher education. He is the one and only Mr. Paul Fain. Paul, thank you for being here on the EdUp Experience podcast.
Thanks, Joe. That was fun.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've just EdUp'd.
Oh, yeah.
Attention higher ed marketing and enrollment management professionals. We are taking the EdUp Experience podcast to Insights EDU. Join us at Insights EDU on February 20th to 22nd, 2024 in Phoenix, Arizona. Gain insight into the latest higher education trends and cutting-edge marketing strategies that'll take your institution's enrollment to a whole new level. This is your opportunity to connect with higher education leaders and marketing experts from across the country. Comprehensive presentations, engaging panel discussions, and more. Insights EDU will equip you to position your institution for growth. Register now at insightsedu.com and use the code EDUP to save $50 off your registration. Can you afford to miss this conference?
I don't think so.
Attention.
Forbes called commencement the beginning of a new era in higher education, a dispensable touch point for what's being said in, about, and around higher education now. Don't miss the insights from 125 college and university presidents about what the future of higher education holds. Pick up your copy of Commencement on Amazon today.